Hello, it's Regina again. This is episode 4 of Let's Get Real About Racism. And the first few weeks, I was wanting to talk about our justice system and how corrupt it is. And things kept happening to push that back. So we are going to discuss that today. Tragically, we have lost another innocent black man this week at the hands of police. His name is George Floyd. So today's episode will be in honor of his life and his tragic murder. I could not watch this video, and in each episode I've encouraged particularly white folks to watch the videos of what's happening so that they understand how desperate, dire, and horrific the situation is, particularly regarding police violence against black individuals, both male and female. This week I couldn't watch it. I saw clips of it, and it was too much for me, which is what some of the black community is calling for from the white community, for us to stand up, take notice. If the video makes you nauseous, then you need to see it, because you can't deny what's happening any longer, and it's getting worse and worse. So before we launch into the judicial system and how that is continuing slavery amongst the black community, I want to talk about two things that happened this week. George Floyd was pulled out of his car, handcuffed, put on the ground. An officer put his knee on his neck, stood there with his knee on his neck for 5 minutes. The entire time, Mr. Floyd was not resisting arrest. He was not fighting. He was pleading for his life. He was telling the officer he couldn't breathe, telling him, my neck hurts, my stomach hurts. And this officer is so casual in his killing of this man, and the fact that it was another day at the office. It was no big deal. This was recorded by 4 different people standing there trying to get the police to stop. There were 3 officers with the 4th who had his knee on Mr. Floyd's neck. So at this point, they've all been fired. And there was a huge backlash last night in Minneapolis at the precinct where those officers were fired, because people are calling for them to be arrested for murder, and rightly so. Then we had, to step outside of our theme of the judicial system for just a moment, we had another situation this week where a white woman named Amy Cooper, who is an executive, a professional, you would think intelligent and educated, was walking her dog in a park, but she had the dog off the leash, and the rules were stated that you should have your dog on a leash. And so an African-American man who was also walking in the park, I think he was feeding birds or bird viewing, asked her respectfully to put the dog back on the leash. Now, a point that I want to make here is, historically, dogs have been trained to hunt African Americans, and this goes back hundreds of years. And black men in particular have a right to be scared of dogs, particularly loose dogs that probably aren't properly trained. And so he was very much within his rights to request this of her, and he was not in any way volatile or condescending or intimidating her. He was being respectful in this request. And suddenly she decides to call the police, and she tells him that she's going to tell them that an African-American man is attacking her. And ultimately, she was fired from her job, as she should have been, because someone who behaves in this manner is not someone that can be trusted. What she did in that situation was played into the racism that exists within our culture. And she had a false sense of superiority towards this man. She couldn't see her own wrong in the situation. She couldn't see her own responsibility for bringing about that entire situation. And she's part of the problem. So as we move forward, I know that a lot of people, and I've certainly had people I grew up with and have known who are police officers, really want to stand up for the men in blue. And they, as we have the Black Lives Matter movement, these individuals say Blue Lives Matter, and these people put their lives on the line every day, and they have a right to be doing what they're doing. We have a problem in our justice system, and we need to get very real about that, and we need to implement a solution quickly. The media has really focused the last few years on how things are handled differently in European countries, where police officers are taught to diffuse situations. They're taught when they interact with someone to detect if they are mentally ill or disabled or have a situation that is causing them to behave in the way that they are. And they're not soldiers. They're not taught to go in and kill. They're taught to protect and save. And it's a very different police force and a different dynamic culturally with law enforcement in other countries. And it's something that we need to mirror. We have a real issue here. Something I noticed early on in my life is a lot of times you have police officers that are hired that during their lifetime were bullied or abused in some way, and they put on this cloak of police armor and they decide to take out their revenge and empower themselves through the badge. I'm going to guesstimate this is 30 to 40% of the time. So you have police officers who have a vigilante attitude, and then you have other police officers who are maybe on the border, who don't have that police officer's psychological issues, but allow it to pass because it's a brotherhood, and you protect one another, and you protect your fellow police officers above all else, which allows the behavior to continue. It in fact fosters it. So we need a major overhaul of our police force and our law enforcement system. And we need to take that very seriously. It needs to happen. It needs to happen now. About 8 years ago, around 2011, there were 2 judges in Pennsylvania who were charged with racketeering because from the years 2002 and 2008, they had funneled young black boys and girls into a private child juvenile facility, and they were getting kickbacks for that. So there was a situation where a young child had been on MySpace and had made fun of his assistant principal, and this judge sent him to jail, to juvenile hall, because he got a kickback. So one judge received approximately $2 million over that 6-year period, a second judge over $1 million. And these were, of course, privately owned juvenile facilities. And if this happened in Pennsylvania and we caught 2 judges, how often is it happening that we don't catch them? All you have to do is look at our prison systems, both the juvenile, federal, all of them across the board. And there is a disproportionate percentage of African Americans in jail. Our judges are not treating our African American citizens the same way they do white citizens. They're not giving them the benefit of the doubt. They're not giving them another chance. In fact, they're using them to fuel prisons. And sometimes those prison systems are government owned, and a lot of times they're privately owned, and we need to take a serious look at that. So that's what I wanted to touch on regarding law enforcement. I support our law enforcement. I'm not saying that all police officers are bad. I'm not even saying 50% of police officers are bad. What I am saying is that we have a moral responsibility to train law enforcement to diffuse situations instead of abuse people and abuse their power. And there needs to be testing a lot more extensive regarding racism when it comes to this, because for too long we know that police departments were pulling people over because they were black, and they really bought into, I apologize, I can't remember the term right now, but they bought into this because they're black, they're more likely to be criminals or drug abusers, and so we have a responsibility to harass these people. And I see this even here in Vegas. I mean, I'm driving down the road and I'm seeing the people pulled over, and 9 times out of 10 they're black or Hispanic. That's a problem we need to look at, because it doesn't mean that white people aren't selling drugs. It doesn't mean white people aren't speeding. It doesn't mean white people aren't doing something wrong. It means they're given the benefit of the doubt that our black citizens are not, and that's wrong. So we need to work on that. So that is episode 4 of Let's Get Real About Racism. Tragically, when I come back next week, there's probably going to be more to talk about. More news stories, more things that the media is shining a light on. And as much as I hate what is happening to these people and the lives that are being lost, if this is what has to happen for us to create the necessary and positive change, effective immediately, that should have happened hundreds of years ago, then let's get on it. Thank God for smartphones and social media. So I leave you today with my sentiment. Are you a part of the solution or a part of the problem? It's time that we stepped up to bat and decided.